Do you ever just feel like... I feel like I was supposed to dance there or something. Good thing I didn't. Do you ever feel like you're not good enough? For one, I'm not good enough at dancing to dance on stage. So that's one thing. But in general, do you ever have that feeling like you're comparing to other people? Like, just the way that other people live their life. It's like I don't quite measure up. And for me, somewhere that this really hit was with my education and just like general being able to focus for most of my teenage life. You know, if I actually look at my grades when I was in elementary, it started off pretty strong. I think it was like an A-, B+ student, and things were going pretty strong, but I actually, maybe it's related, maybe it's not, but in grade 5, I actually got hit in the head by a big rock, and it seemed like everything spiraled out of control from there, which probably would be a problem. There was a concussion involved, but I don't think that's what actually caused it. But around 11 or 12 years old, my grades just started to slip. I couldn't really focus. I went from that B- student to kind of like a C+, C-, and if I really hated it, like we were walking the line of failing, right? And this is actually back when you could fail things in school, and I just didn't like it because it's like school, elementary school, all these different things, like it takes your whole day. You don't get breaks, you just sit there, you get one class, it's one type of boring, and then it's another hour, it's like, all right, time to go to another room to be bored by something else for a period of time. Felt that? At least in college, you go to college, you're like, well, I only have 2 classes today. Sometimes one's at 8 in the morning and one's at 3:30, and you have to stay on the North End, even though you live in Beaumont, which is the worst, and I think we've been there as well. But at least you have some freedom. You probably have a car, you maybe have a little money, you can go get a Starbucks, you can kind of go have a nap on a couch or something. You have freedom. But my whole life, I always thought, you know, my brain's broken. Like, I'm just lazy, I'm unorganized, I'm a little messy, I'm all over the place. And I thought I'd grow out of it. I never did. I'm 33, still have those issues. And to be honest, a little while ago, I was talking to a friend about it who has her master's in psychology, and she's like, Jeff, have you ever thought that you have ADHD? Like, nah, no. Maybe for a second I thought about it, but then I thought about something else really quickly. And consequently, I decided I'll go check it out. Now, I know that there's a trend on TikTok where every person and their dog is identifying as ADHD, and that I was kind of hesitant because of that. Went in, talked to the doctor, set up a test. I lost my keys the morning of the test, could not find them, missed the test. That's like the final boss of ADHD right there. So the doctor phoned me, he's like, hey, so what happened? I'm like, oh, I lost my keys. Does that happen often? Every day, doc, every day. Story of my life. Consequently, long story short, I have adult ADHD. Now, that's not anything crazy, but if I could tell you that my whole life I felt this comparison with other people, you know, organized people, people that know where things are, people that their desktop screen on their computer doesn't look like a work of art collage because it's not just covered. There are layers, and I know where everything is in the chaos of that screen, but it gives people who are organized an anxiety attack when they look at it. I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I always felt like I was always comparing to these other people, and I think that we do that with a lot of different areas in our life. Not always because we have some medical history, but just in general, the way that we live our lives, the patterns that we follow, we all kind of struggle with comparing with others. And there's few things in life that impact our thought life more than comparison. We've all done it on some level. And I think we can all think of somebody that we've looked up to, somebody who maybe was like an athlete, maybe it's someone else, maybe it was a neighbor, and you're like, I want to do what they do. I want to live the life they live, and said to herself that I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, they have it all together, I want to be that person. They have this perfect version of their life, and I don't measure up to that. And that's been amplified by social media, right? Because we see everybody else's highlight reel in their life. We see the best of their life. We never see their lows. We only see their best moments, the moments that they spent all their time filtering and putting on makeup and editing and photoshopping and fixing their life, making it look like it's all together. But some of it's real, some of it's fabricated, but at the end of the day, we kind of have this feeling of like, I want that. I want that car. I want that house. I want that spouse. Not meant to rhyme there, it just kind of happened. Like, I want to go that vacation. How on earth does she afford another trip to Europe? She works at Starbucks half-time. She's never had a full-time job, and she's in Italy again? Something's up there. I don't know what it is, but I don't like it. And we start to think, like, why don't I have that? My idea of a vacation is going to Alberta Beach. It's dirty. It's just a body of water. There's no beach. It's just dirt. You can't swim in it. You get a rash. I ain't going to Italy. I love Alberta Beach, but it ain't no Italy. Let's put it that way, right? Alberta is not the best place to go on vacation. And I see these people who are going to Italy, going to Hawaii. Oh, they're in Mexico again. This person's in Chile. How did they even know where to go at that time? They're in Paris. And it just feels like I don't measure up. And like, this isn't a new thing, though. Like, for all of human history, we've been comparing with other people. And like, we can see this even in the Bible, in biblical history. In the first book of the Bible, it's called Genesis. You just open it to the start. It starts in Genesis. There's a story of two of the first humans to ever exist. Very, very early on, there's these two brothers, Cain and Abel. And Cain gets upset. And he starts to become jealous of his brother, and he decides to murder him for this perceived jealousy that he has, this perception that God favors his brother. So he grabs a rock and he beats his brother to death. This is the first historical note of murder in history. It's because he was jealous and he was comparing his life to his brother's life. And this has continued over 3,000 years ago in the book of Exodus when Moses, you may have heard about him, the guy who freed the Hebrews or the Jews from slavery in Egypt with God's help. He clearly writes in this book in the Bible, Exodus, on this idea of comparison. Now this is kind of biblical terms and we don't always talk this way, but in Exodus 20, verse 17, we're going to throw it up there on the screen. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. That's, again, Exodus 20:17. Now, I don't regularly have a problem with coveting or having an unquenchable thirst for my neighbor's donkey or ox. It doesn't come up in casual conversation as I'm walking out. Hey, it's a nice donkey you got there. I sure want that. Not a problem for me. But I can comprehend this desire or this jealousy that we could have. And that's really what covet means. It's not a common word we use in our language today, but it really just means to like have this desire, this unquenchable want, this jealousy that we have. I could see that going towards my neighbor's car, my neighbor's job, career, success, lifestyle. My friend who got the job that I wanted while I'm still stuck in school. I never went to school and their life just seems so much better than me. I look at their Instagram. Why am I not like that? Why can't I talk like that person? Why am I never good enough? So it's natural. It's something we all do. We're constantly comparing. And the fact is, I don't want to make it sound like comparing is always the worst thing in the world. It can make us a better person. It can make us follow the example of other people. There's people in all of our lives that we probably want to pattern our life after. Like, think to yourself, who is that mentor in your life or that person that you really, really want to be like? Is it a family member? Is it a parent? Is it a teacher? Is it a pastor? Is it a celebrity, an influencer? Who is it that you are trying, whether you recognize or not, to emulate the way that this person lives their life? For me, there's people that I look up to in my faith as well. Have you ever had somebody, maybe you haven't had the privilege of having somebody who invests in you who's older in the context of a Jesus-based life. But there are people in my life who have stepped in and been that for me, who I look at, I'm like, man, they just have it together. I want to be like that person. I want to be like that pastor, that mentor in my life. My boss, Phil, he's somebody that has invested in me for over 15 years now, and I just always have wanted to be like him. And there's people like beyond that, like my father-in-law. I remember for a period of time, long story short, to finish school, me and my wife, within a year of getting married, had to move in with my in-laws in Devon, every young man's dream. But I remember every morning I'd wake up, and my father-in-law, he works a hard job, like construction, like he's long hours, and he'd be there reading his Bible with a electric back massager going because he's so sore and he's about to go back to work. And every morning, I don't think I ever missed it, where he would have the discipline to read his Bible and pray. And I want to be like that. There are people in my life who that is what I want to be like. Mentors, people who seemingly have it together. And sometimes I compare to them, and I'm like, yeah, like that's something I really want to be like. Like, you know that person in your life, they just know what to say in the right moment. They've got that one-liner, that quote of wisdom. They can quote the Bible like they wrote it. It's like, how did you learn? How did you memorize all those things? I can barely remember my wife's phone number. You know every verse in the Bible by heart. How did you do that? They can quote it at any time, and they just sound so wise and calculated, and they never seem to have any doubt in their faith where, I'm struggling with this right now, and I'm wrestling with this idea about Christianity and following Jesus and my worldview and the world's view on Christianity and all these different things, and they just seem to be so calm, so strong at all times. I wish I could be like that. Seems like they never sin. I can't imagine they sin ever. They just look at them, all these things I just talked about. They have their life together in every way. Why can't I be like that? Now, obviously, we know nobody's perfect. That's just kind of like the perception we get. But when we see people who are like this, it can become this problem for us and seem daunting. That we see the success that these people have in life, whether it's in a spiritual context, following Jesus, or a career, or all these different things, that we might struggle with actually trying to figure out where we fit into this. How can I ever be like that person? It just seems so far and so unattainable. It's such a high level of excellence, like it just seems like an unreachable position. Like, I know Jesus was perfect, and that's the goal. And if you're new to the Jesus-based life, that's really what it is. We see the person of Jesus as we find him in the Bible, and if you go to right in the middle of the Bible, start of the second half, which is the New Testament, there's these 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's a great place to start. You can go on your Bible app, if you have a physical Bible. If you don't have one, you can come talk to us. We would love to give you one. But it's this first-person account of Jesus who lived a perfect life. He never sinned. If you follow the example of those 4 books of his life and everything he did, you got it figured out. That is the gold standard. And so he's perfect. That's the goal, is to pattern our lives after him, who we've made God of our life, of our soul, of our mind, of our heart, of our thoughts, of everything. But then I see all these supposedly imperfect people around me who are so clearly leaps and bounds ahead of where I am in life. And I just think, like, I just don't know how I'm going to get there. And we have these 2 ways of dealing it that I see often. We kind of categorize Christians or people that are, ahead of us or are a little more established or seem to have it together. We kind of like to make these novelty versions of them because it's not easy to recognize that there might be flaws in my own life. Because no one wants to think about that. And that's really a move in our culture right now, where you're not allowed to say anything bad about anyone, including yourself. Now listen, I'm not here that saying you should have horrible negative self-talk all the time. Just get in the mirror every morning and berate yourself for all your failures. I'm not here to counter against traditional and modern psychology. But I think that we kind of create this perception of Christians, of people who have it together, in 2 trains of thought. There's that hypocrite, the fraud, the one who says all the right things but does the opposite, the liar, and they are just in it all for clout. They're the ones that you hear about who they looked really good, they knew what to say, and the next thing you know, they took off on their private jet plane and took all your money. And it's kind of like that televangelist, that prosperity gospel type person that we all have heard about. That is the great example. There's always the person who's like a couple weeks away from a Netflix documentary, right? We've all seen examples. And then there's the other side, because it can sometimes feel like to actually follow Jesus, to do this like Jesus-based life thing well, that we have to be weird, like a nerd, a weirdo. Like, I think when people think of Christians, sometimes it's kind of like this, like, well, after homeschool today, I'm going to go and continue some further studies for recreational purposes, and I'm going to confirm my hypothesis that the earth is flat. And I'm going to confirm my hypothesis that science is magic, and that everything is scary, and also nothing is real, and I'm scared. Like, that's the person that we think of, this Ned Flanders Christianity, this person that is kind of like out of the real world, that wants to go to just Christian hip-hop concerts all the time. And there's nothing wrong if you love Christian hip-hop, but this kind of weird cultural, subculture Christian phenomenon that we've seen. And most people look at that like, I want to be more like Jesus, but I don't want to be more like that. That doesn't connect with anyone that didn't grow up in that subculture for the most part. And so we think that the two options are, in order to be perceived as a good Christian, you're either the hypocrite who says that they're all together, but they're really a crook or they're just fake, or there's this perception of this person that isn't even a real person, that you could never have a normal conversation with. And I would actually argue with you that there is not that example as being true, that isn't what we're talking about. Because I'm sure we can find, for number one, we can find all sorts of documentaries, Instagram accounts, podcasts of these people being exposed for being that crook. And we all know somebody who's just a little too weird for real life to be a real human being. But the balance isn't actually on those two extremes. It's actually, like most things, somewhere in the middle. So as we go through Romans, we've been going through this series, Heavy Hitters, going through the book of Romans a little bit at a time. And if you haven't yet, on our website, we have an opportunity for you to track with us through a reading plan over these 2 months. And it's not too late to catch up. It's really not that much to go through the book of Romans in a short amount of time. 2 months is plenty of time to get through it. And so we're going to continue to work through it together. And I wanted to just mention, when we're talking about this, we're talking about a book, a letter that was written to a church in Rome by a guy named Paul. We talked about him last week if you were here, and if you haven't, you can check out past messages on YouTube or on our podcast. We're talking about Paul, who wrote this letter to this church in Rome, to this place that is traditionally not religious. It's actually kind of more philosophical. They're focused on their own intellect, their own mind. It's very similar to the world that we live in today. And Paul is this hero of Christianity. In my mind, he's someone that I want to be like. He wrote a good chunk of the Bible. He's this honestly, a hero to me, and without him, really the greatest catalyst of the gospel of the Christian church to this date since Jesus. He wrote a good chunk of the Bible. He's worth listening to. But in this verse, he's not just expounding wisdom. He's not just giving you here's the do's and don'ts. He's not doing it what he normally does. He's not passing on these really, really great one-liners. He's actually being really honest and really vulnerable, more than you would expect. So let's go into Romans 7:14. It starts with, "So the trouble is not with the law," and this is Paul, "for it is spiritual and good. The trouble is with me, for I am all too human, a slave to sin. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But if I know what I'm doing is wrong, this shows that I agree that the law is good. So I'm not the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. And I know that nothing good lives in me. That is, in my sinful nature, I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyways. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart, but there is another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death?" Uplifting stuff, right? Put that next to your live, laugh, love sign, Grandma. This is the stuff you want to show people when they walk into your room or have in your bathroom, to be just uplifting in general. This isn't the stuff you think about when you're going to the Bible looking to feel better about your day. This is really a completely different trajectory. And at this time, it's kind of hard to comprehend this, because when he's writing this, there probably isn't a greater or more respected Christian leader than Paul. He had this miraculous encounter. He was hunting Christians. He was a bounty hunter, just ruthlessly trying to have them murdered. He stood over the death of disciples of Jesus, people who followed him, and literally stood there giving approval. That's the first time we see Paul. There's a literal murder happening, and he's just standing there yeah, I like that. That's good. He was a bad dude. But then he has this miraculous encounter. You can find it in the book of Acts if you're looking for it, second half of the Bible. And he meets Jesus, has this encounter with the Holy Spirit, and he has his life radically turned around. And next thing you know, he is the greatest advocate for the cause of the church. He's wise. He knows Jesus closely. And he's literally planting churches everywhere, and the church movement that has brought all of us into this place or tuning in online today was started by him. In one way or another, he's a part of our story. So he is like this great guy. And he clearly knows God well. If you look through what's called the epistles, or like the letters of Paul to the church, there's lots of them in the second half of the New Testament. He's wise. He's got all these perfect solutions, it seems. He's got it together. He's got it figured out, and he's clearly pretty confident. But here he is in this section, lamenting, groaning. His sin is giving him anguish. He feels like he's literally worthless. And if I can be honest with you, when I think of people like this, mentors, heroes of the Bible, Pastor Paul, and then I look at my life, even as a pastor, and I look at the patterns I have at times, and the mistakes I make, and the way I think, and just who I am, and I struggled with the fact that it makes me feel insecure. Because I can look at those examples and I can be like, man, I'm just not good enough. You know, it really exposes the comparison of like where I fall short, because these people, Paul, other pastors in my life, like they just seem like they have it together. So why at times does it feel like I don't? When I compare, I feel insecure. I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like I don't measure up. What's wrong with me? Have you been there before? With faith? You know that maybe you've been following Jesus your whole life and you've just never felt like you measure up. Like your parents or your grandparents, they're Christians. That's what a Christian is. But I sin. I struggle. I doubt. Or just in your life in general, do you look at people in your workplace, at your school, and you're like, I'm not good enough ever. I'm always comparing. I'm never getting where I need to go. And it, frankly, sucks. I don't measure up. But yet we have Paul, who I look up to, and I think, man, like this is a great example. If I could be like Paul, I'd have it pretty much figured out. I may not be as good as Jesus, but I'd be better than where I am today. And I think most of us in this room would feel that. Yet with that being said, Paul, it says things like, the trouble with me is that I am too human and I am a slave to sin. And I know that nothing good lives in me. I love God's law with all my heart. I love God's law with all my heart. But there is another power within me, a war in my mind. He just said all these things. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Well, I'll tell you what. If that's how Paul feels, I might as well pack it in. Where am I going to go with this? How much better is it going to get? If he feels that way, then this is clearly not realistic. This is clearly something that none of us can ever attain, because like he's great and I'm me. So why even try? If he feels like he's dominated by sin, what hope do I have? This doesn't exactly sound like a hero of the Jesus-based life. Somebody with their life together, a person who has like this struggle that's fighting what he says is a war in his mind, and it feels like something that would make me feel defeated. But the fact is, through most of his letters, even beyond Romans, we see this come up time and time again. Even in the midst of his wisdom, of what he's teaching us, we see Paul regularly say things like, there's a quote where he says, I am the chief of all sinners. That's a pretty strong statement. Like, I am unequivocally the chief of sin. I've never said that about myself, even in my worst moments. Yet he doesn't disqualify himself. God doesn't disqualify him. Instead, he gets back up, he leads, and he still pushes forward. Even though he's lamenting his failures, even though he recognizes them, there's still one thing that drives him forward. So what's the difference there? Why, if he's actually doing great things, why is he struggling so much with this idea of not being perfect? Well, there is one key difference between him and me and you. Paul isn't comparing himself to other people. You know, where I compare myself to Paul or mentors in my life, or you have people in your life that you want to emulate, he's actually comparing himself just to Jesus. And as we've established, Jesus is the gold standard. If you read Jesus' life, if you emulate it, you are going to be hitting it right on the nose, on target, not sinning, living their best possible life. He's actually acknowledging the fact. He's looking at the example of Jesus. He's looking at what perfection looks like. And he has anguish about the fact that he isn't anywhere near that. He looks at what Jesus' example is, and he looks at his life, even amongst all the good things he's doing, starting churches, leading churches, sharing the good news of Jesus with everyone around him, making the world a better place everywhere that he goes, and he's still struggling. So I don't think that that's necessarily an example of why we're all disqualified, but it's an example of where we need to go and how far our reality is from the reality that Jesus calls us to. Because every other human being in history has sinned and will sin. Everyone you look up to has sinned and will sin. You have sinned, you will sin. It's built into us. Paul is looking at his life compared to the gold standard, not a broken person who's doing better than most. And that's where his anguish comes from. So what can we learn from that? Well, first of all, the standard is not other people. And once we start trying to compare ourselves to other people in any way of life, in a way that's rooted out of jealousy, we're not doing it in a healthy way. That's not a healthy comparison. Like I said, you need mentors in your life. You need people that can help you get to where they are if they're further ahead. But the goal is not other people. The goal is not to achieve a number of possessions that other people have either, because like we've talked about, that can become this awful jealousy, that comparison that's unattainable, this social media influencer copycat way of living where we feel like we're not good enough because of it. At the end of the day, if you're finding your identity in anything that's possession related, finances, or success related, you will never be happy because your identity doesn't come from what you own. Your identity doesn't come from your degree, how much school you've been to, how smart you are, how dumb you are, whatever it is, good or bad. Your identity doesn't come from your deficits. It comes from what Jesus has said about you, that you're a child of God, that you were made with a purpose, that every person here is God's masterpiece. We've talked about that a couple of times going through this book of Romans, that you are a masterpiece. And it sounds cheesy and lame, and like it's not something I would say because it's so strongly worded. A masterpiece, a work of art. And you're thinking, I am not a masterpiece. If you only knew my blemishes, if you only knew my track record, if you only knew my thought patterns, if you only knew my selfishness, you would not say I'm a masterpiece. And you're probably right. I wouldn't, because I'm a human being, and I'm broken, and I sin. Jesus sees you for who you are. Your identity is in Christ. Your identity is in what Jesus did for you on the cross, the forgiveness that comes to every single person in spite of all those blemishes, in spite of all those things, that he still stands there and says, if you would follow me, if you'll make Jesus the king of your life, you will finally see that you are a masterpiece. Second one is that Paul sins, and even though he sins, he still does great things. And the same is true for you. That opportunity is there for you. You think God can never use me. I'll never rise above my history, my past. I'll never rise above the words that were spoken to me or that I've spoken or the actions that I've taken. You know, like how could God use somebody who sucks like me? He can and he does. Regularly. Paul murdered Christians. Like his life's purpose was to murder and entrap and imprison and wipe out Jesus' entire movement before it could get off the ground. Are you worse than that? No. No, you're not. And if you've been telling yourself that you're the worst, you need to hear this right now. You are not unsavable. You are not worthless. You are not garbage. You are not whatever you've been spinning around in your head over and over and over again. And if I can get something through to you tonight, know this. You are the masterpiece that we talked about. Jesus loves you and will use you and give you incredible purpose. He literally knew your purpose before you were born. He's been planning for this for a long time. Since eternity. He's always known you're coming. He made you into who you are for a reason. And you can do incredible things, and you will do incredible things, but you have to trust him. Paul, in spite of his weaknesses, the things that he is showing he struggles with, he was still able to do all sorts of crazy, awesome things. And so can you, but you have to put your trust in the forgiveness that Jesus offers. Paul knew there was grace for him, but he still saw the sin for what it was. And this is where I want to camp for a second. I want to say one thing to you, but there's a caveat. If you feel like you are too much of a sinner and that you have all these sins, you've been missing the mark, your actions are just so far off, you feel like you're broken, you're not good enough, especially when you compare to other people, know this: you can be patient. Jesus is patient with you. If you've been to church before and you've experienced where it's kind of like this judgmental thing, well, you have to have everybody of your life together or else get out of the church. We don't want you here. Like, get out. Security, get that person. They're bad. If you've experienced that before, if that's kind of the perception that maybe a bad actor or a bad just expression of what a Jesus-based life looks like, I'm sorry that happened to you. And so what I want to tell you is this, is like you may be struggling with a perpetual sin right now, a pattern or a habit, maybe even addiction, regularly looking at porn or going to substance abuse, or you just like your mind, the way you think is just not the right way, you're selfish, whatever it is. There's so many different things it could be for each individual person here. Don't be too hard on yourself as you seek Jesus. Because Jesus has grace. We talk about that quite a bit if you've been to church. Jesus extends grace, patience, forgiveness, and these are all great things. And I want to hammer down on that there is nothing you could be doing, there's nothing in your life where you don't have that grace extended to you. But the caveat is this, because sometimes, especially with young adults, we hear this idea that Jesus has grace, like be patient with yourself. You know, like it's not that big a deal. Know this, within that grace, gotta chase holiness. You gotta chase the Jesus standard, the Jesus example with everything in your heart. You can't cheapen the grace just because you can be patient with yourself, just because you can recognize that you're not perfect. Recognizing that everyone sins and you probably will sin again, and that you're going to have to be able to get back up after that and be able to live with yourself and not just hide from God, but to stand up and say, okay, I'm going to install some new disciplines in my life. I'm going to talk to God about what I need to do to get those patterns out of my day to day. I need to do better, and I'm willing to try to do that. But we sometimes go to the other side where it's like, oh, there's grace everywhere. It's just grace. I just, it's not that big of a deal. Sin is not that bad. The church really, it's not even, the Bible didn't really say that. Can I do this? Can I do that? It's really there's just a textbook. It's kind of more like this self-help book. It doesn't really mean that you can't do this or that. It's really inconvenient not to do this or that or this and that. And then we just kind of water down the grace that Jesus extends to us. The fact is that you can't comprehend and you can't fully experience the grace that Jesus extends to us if you don't recognize the weight of what he takes away, which is our sin and our wretchedness and our brokenness. And that's why we celebrate. That's why we follow Jesus, because otherwise he becomes just a good teacher. I have some great teachers I follow on Instagram, whether it's with working out or different things like that. I'm like, I like what they're saying, but I could just ignore them. I can just say, I don't agree with that part. I think CrossFit's dumb. I'm going to tear your labrum. It's foolishness. But I can just ignore what I don't want to, what's inconvenient to me. There are inconvenient parts about following Jesus. The reality is, Jesus is who he says he is. Sin is what he says it is. And so for you to fully understand the grace, the patience that allows you to be patient with yourself and to still love who you are and see yourself through the lens that Jesus does, even in your darkest moments, we have to recognize that we are sinners. We miss the mark. I do. We all do. And that we can't be okay with that and complacent with that. We need to wake up every day and say, God, how do I look more like you? Not how do I look more like this pastor or Paul or anyone else. How do I look more like you? Turn to those books in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. See who Jesus is and see who you are. And don't wallow in it. Don't be like, woe is me, my life sucks. I suck. Ask Jesus, what do I need to correct? Let's work on this. Let's go for this. Jesus is the only influencer worth following, the only God worth worshiping. It's the only thing that's worth chasing after. Culture says worship yourself. Culture says worship money. Culture says you need more things. Culture says that self-care, self-love, self-positive talk, not all those things are bad. Manifest your future. Just speak it into existence. The fact is that ain't going to change your life. That might help you psychologically. There's some benefits to some of those things, not, worshiping money or those things, but self-care, it's kind of been overdone. It doesn't matter how many times you speak something into an existence, how many times you try to manifest your future. your words are just words, just sound waves echoing out into nothing. Unless they land on the ears of Jesus and God can intervene in your situation, you're wasting your breath. Without Jesus, it's all worthless, but the good news is with Jesus, it's all worthwhile. And that's how you go from broken to a masterpiece. Jesus says, let go, follow me through the ups and downs, and I will make your life worth living. And that's the standard we go after. So, do you want that in your life? Maybe you're here and you're thinking, man, like, Jeff, I want to follow Jesus. I want that. I'm tired of just chasing, running up the down escalator, running on the treadmill, getting nowhere, exhausting myself. I want that finally. Or maybe you've had that before and you ran away from it a long time ago and you're thinking it's time to just reconnect. No one even knows how far you are from God. You've been in church every week, but you're far from him and you want to kind of reconnect. It's as simple as just asking Jesus to change your heart, to change your mind, and acknowledging that you're going to follow him. And so I just want to give you that opportunity. Where you are right now, if that's you, just pray this prayer along with me in your heart. So God, thank you so much that even though we make all these mistakes, all these things that Paul talks about, even though we measure up short, we know that that grace that you offer to us, that it supersedes, it goes beyond and covers all of the rottenness in our hearts and our lives and in our minds, all the mistakes we made. We know that you look at us as your children. You look at us as valuable in spite of all those things, and we don't have to be defined by those. Our identity comes from you. So God, we just say that thank you so much for Jesus on the cross. Jesus, we just say to you that we want to follow you. We acknowledge our brokenness and we give you our sin, and we want to pattern our lives after your perfect example. We love you. We trust you. We pursue you with everything in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. So if that's you, we'll have an opportunity later as well, but we're going to want to connect with you. We'll have a slide that can go on the screen, a QR code. It's on the back of your seat as well. Let us know that you made that decision, and we'd love to have that conversation and celebrate that with you. But for the rest of us, before the band starts, I just want to challenge you. Project, may you be people who chase after Jesus with all of your heart. May you be people who pursue the excellence and perfect standard of a Jesus-based life. And may you be people who have the discipline to get back up again when you fall down, shake the dust off, walk towards the true north that Jesus is, and that welcomes us in spite and despite our failures. It's available to all of us. If you're able to stand, let's stand together and sing.